So we're on, and unfortunately, I can't have my father sitting with me right now because he's under strict orders that he has to avoid me at all costs. But what we're here today to talk about with my father is about his experience in going through what all of us are going through today. We're going through an unprecedented time, but in his world, he went through a very difficult time with the depression. And so my first question to you, Dad, was when everything hit like we got, and it was just the first wham of what was, how did you deal with just the fear, right? Because all of a sudden just things just stopped. And what was it like? I mean, panic, or were people calm? What was the sentiment?
Well, it was a little bit more gradual in the sense in 32. And I was just a little boy, young, after all, I was only 8 years old when I was actually 5.5 when my father died in 1930, and the Depression had already started. So as I was growing up, we realized that we lost everything. And we were just one of many, many people who lost. And there was no money, there was no cash. People actually had new coins and money from the state was printing some money for you. And it was just terrible. Nobody had any money. And we had to realize that we were living in a time when to heat the house, you had coal, and some of the people still had toilets outside, and it was a rough time. In fact, at that time, as you all know, people from Oklahoma just deserted, and there are some great movies of what happened. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying. It was a bad time because when you think about it, but they survived, but it took a long time, a much longer time than it's going to take in this situation. This is terrible because there's so much illness, but there was a lot of illness there too, but it was mostly the flu. And you got to realize that in World War I, which was 1917, 1918, the amount of deaths that occurred were tremendous. So that we are fortunate today that we have the medicine and the capabilities that we have. And I really feel that as bad as it is, it's not nearly as bad as it was then. We overcame that. We overcame a lot of things. We overcame wars, and we're still here, better than ever before.
And what was your mom like, my grandmother, but your mom like during this time as sort of the keeper of the house? How did she insulate you? Did she, I want to get some life lessons because all of us are parents. And so what lessons did you learn from your mom during this period of time?
Well, I learned from my mother that we had to do our duty as two boys. My brother was 3.5 years older than me, and we were taught that we had a duty to help. And we were young men, and by the time the Depression was still on, and we joined the Boy Scouts by that time, but our job was to assist my mother in every possible way, because she was not a well woman. She had a bad heart, and nevertheless, she raised us and was out terribly. She even, I can still see her walking down the street with her last jewels, which she pawned to have a little money for boys. And it was just a terrible time. So I think my brother and I would go out selling. My brother, when he was in high school, He had a job, a newspaper route. He also delivered furs at night, and every Saturday he worked at Cress's in the kitchen there, washing dishes. And yet he graduated high school with tops. But I did okay, and we had to earn our own. From the time I was a boy of maybe 10, I was starting to earn all of my own spending money and whatever we could do to help my mother, because it was expensive. Life was, I mean, you had for a cup of coffee, you had to pay a nickel. So anyway, there wasn't much. But I do believe you don't realize how bad it can be. It can be worse than it is today here.
So the lessons learned, obviously, from your mom was that, you know, certainly there was love in the household, right? I mean, you always knew that there was love, and that was number one. But there was also this great learning of need to support each other and the community at the same time.
Well, my mother was a big lady. She was almost 5 feet tall. And I can tell you how she respected her boys. And I know my brother and I were out playing, and these couple of bullies came down from the hill. It was winter, and they started giving my brother a hard time. And my mother came out of the house with a broom and knocked one of the kids over. So that's the kind of gal she was. But she expected the best of us, and she expected us to learn and to go and to help other people. That was very important with her. So I don't know more to tell you, except that I could go for days talking about things that happened, and it was really tough.
But also during that time of tough times, there are also wonderful moments that you remember too, right? Because during tough times, there are also great moments, great things that have happened, things that you overcame, but also very joyous times too. I want the people to understand that during this time, there were happy moments as well, right?
Oh, yes. Well, when my mother hit this guy with a broom, my brother and I were cheering. You know, a lot of happy times. After all, in Salt Lake, you could ski down the hill next to you. My brother got in a pair of old skis that didn't even have points on them. We put some metal on, and we would ski. It was good, because whenever we had a little time, we'd have a good time to ourselves. And I can still remember I had my paper out, and it was delivered in the afternoon. And then on Sundays, we'd get up, and I had finally a guy helping me, my good friend. And if things were really good, because when you had to buy the papers, and it was just terrific. But then we could get a little hamburger for 5 cents, and if you got a really good day, then for 10 cents you could buy a bigger hamburger. And so in the cold winters, it was nice to have a hot hamburger when we'd finished our delivering papers. And anyway, that's the way things go. What can I tell you?
And during that time, you said there was community activities too, because no one had anything. So it seemed like whether you worked or whether you belonged to AZA or some club, there was a place where the community actually came together more. This wasn't a time for diversity or the divisiveness.
No, it wasn't, and you felt that. But particularly in Salt Lake, which was a Mormon city, and my mother felt that we were just alone over there. So my brother and I attended Mormon Sunday school. And I graduated from Mormon Sunday school, and we went to belonged to Boy Scouts and the troop, and everybody there was damn good. It was just amazing how they really were terrific in terms of helping each other. Well, it didn't make any difference. The Mormons gave a pretty good example, because they always had put money aside. And so they always assumed that there would be a depression. And they took care of everybody in Utah, whatever you were were able to get some food. But it was tough, that's all. But so we had some good times. We had a lot of fun. We would play rubber guns, and we used to shoot at each other, and it was fun. But when you're a boy, you don't realize how bad things are. And my poor mother was it was terrible. But she somehow taught us things, taught us the goodness of life, taught us holidays, and explained all of the things about how we were lucky to be Americans.
And then fast forwarding to when you're a parent, you're obviously raising Minda and I, and that you went through some very tough times as well. Just and you're starting your career where basically you built it from scratch. You did an amazing job of sheltering Minda and I always from the adversities of your business and your your dealings. How did you mold yourself as a parent to teach us, or what do you think you would tell someone today who's a young parent?
Well, I think you have to say that you expect respect from your children, because I don't see that as much today. And I had respect from the two of you. And also that you love them and don't feel so bad that when you're hugging them and doing all things, that you love them when they do well, and when they've got problems that you try to help them. They've got to know that you're there for them. And I think that that's the important thing. And I think you know that, Tim.
No, I know that, but when you were dealing with some of the greatest adversities, did you separate them from the family, or how did you manage that?
Well, I think that you had to keep that to yourself and your wife, Betty. Your mother was a wonderful woman, and on the other hand, everybody has good times and bad times, but slowly but surely, I think having had the basis of the Depression, realizing how hard it was to be poor, not wanting to be poor, that you work harder to gain and not go crazy with your money, so that you can get it bigger and help everybody, and also try to help others after you. The more you had, the more you wanted to help others. So because other people had helped you, and I think the greatest thing that happened to me was the GI Bill of Rights. I mean, that's paid my education, the best schools. I graduated law school at USC, and it was all paid for. They even gave me an allowance while I was going to school. Of course, while I was going to school, I was also working. But when you're trying to raise children, you've got to realize that they have their desires, and you try to help, but sometimes you don't spend enough time with them, and that's not right.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And one last question: who were your heroes growing up? We all in this time, think about that. Who were your heroes?
Well, my biggest hero was my brother. I was always so admirable because he was so good to me. He was just terrific. I mean, you got to realize it. We both were in the war together. He was a pilot, and when he got back, and he'd worked and helped the family just before Pearl Harbor. When we moved out here in 1938, he started as a salesman, and he was making the living and really was supporting your mother and your grandmother and me, although we had a little store at the beach by that time. And my mother was always giving more money to the poor people around the store than so we never made any money on it. Anyway, my brother was terrific. You got to think about this. When he got out of service, he was allowed to, the people wanted him to come back and work as a salesman, but the company had broken into two parts. And so we were advised, why don't you start your own business? And you know the story there. He said, okay. And so on April 1st of 1946, he started the business. And I got back on April 15th and discharged. And he says to me, Chuck, and you've heard this story a million times. He hands me a card, shows Ernest Paper Company. He says, we're in business. And I said, that's terrific. He says, you own half and I own half. I said, but I don't have the money. He says, you own half and I own half. And I said, well, that's terrific. How many people work for us? And he said, you and me. So that's how we started. And that was tough times there. But somehow we managed to grow. So that's the story there. I don't know what more I can tell you. But he was my biggest hero. And he was always charitable, just like my mother was. The one thing that I will tell you that I thought was always great, as poor as we were, she always had a dime or 20 cents or had a little spot on the, and if some poor guy would come around, she was always willing to give them a little money to go out and buy some food. So we found that even when we were unable to go to a movie because we didn't have the money, there was money for those people. So that's the way I think time should be, you know? Right.
Well, I love the conversation, Dad, and I think that the people will love it too. So what I'd love to do is say that maybe during this time, it's sort of like Roosevelt had those fireside chats, which really helped America during the war. And I think that maybe you and I will just have a Friday chat. And from that, hopefully we can put some people at ease.
No, I hope so. That would be very good, Tim. Excellent idea. Anything we can do, our people work so damned hard that and I appreciate it. We've got to show that what we can do to help, and everybody does, then we can all come out of this very well.
Yeah, and so as we go into the weekend, what should we be thinking?
We've got to be thinking of how can we do the best job possible under the conditions we're at. So anybody with ideas should come up and to talk to you or all of the guys, and everybody that has some ideas that we can do better to help ourselves and help this thing succeed. That's important. So I think that's what we should really talk about, because we're all in this together. It isn't just Tim and myself. It's just we're one whole family, and otherwise, you know, I don't need this, but I feel very strongly that it's the way to go.
Great. Love you, and we will talk next week.
Okay, you got it. Love you.
All right. Love you.
Bye.